So thank you. We hope that this is one conversation amongst many leading up to the election, so I encourage everyone to get loud. Let's make sure candidates and federal party leaders know that gender equality is going to be top of mind when we head to the polls at the end of the month. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the moderator, Cynthia Mulligan. You will all know her from City News. Cynthia is very well known, well-accomplished journalist here in Toronto. She also happens to be a strong supporter of Women Act and a very strong advocate for the violence against women sector here in Toronto. So Cynthia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and I love the conversation that's going to evolve here this evening. And I think it's so important that we just have this great discussion so that we can elevate our discussion here and hopefully accomplish some great things going forward. Oh, hello. I'm Cynthia Mulligan, and I'm a reporter with City News in Toronto. Now, I believe each of you got bios of each of the candidates, so you can read up on them in greater detail, but for now I'm just going to introduce them one by one. Starting at the far end of the table, we have Andrea Vasquez Jimenez, and she is the federal NDP candidate for York Centre. Beside her is Jasmine Rattan, who is the federal conservative, did I pronounce that properly?
Jasmine Rattan. Yeah.
Rattan, thank you. I just want to make sure I get it proper. Federal Conservative Party candidate for York South Weston. And then we have Hannah Conover Arthurs, Federal Green Party candidate for Davenport, and Salma Zahid, who is the sitting incumbent Liberal Party of Canada for Scarborough Centre riding. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask the first question. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. And then we have a series of 4 questions that will give roughly 5 minutes to each. I'm going to pose the question to each one. Will get a shot first at the question, and then we'll just open it up and have a great conversation for the next 5 minutes. After that, we'll have closing, and then you will each have a chance to ask your own questions as well. And we look forward to those as well. And we'll give about 25 minutes or so to that segment. Sound good, everybody? We ready to go?
Woo!
All right. So, the last federal debate on gender equality was held 35 years ago, which I find very difficult to believe, back in 1984. Nationally, matters impacting gender equality have been absent through many elections. Tonight's turnout demonstrates that our communities believe gender equality is critical this time around. Why is this discussion important, and what do you think are the most pressing gender equality issues in Canada? And I'm going to start with you.
Hello everyone. My name is Salma Zahid, and I'm the Member of Parliament for Scarborough Centre and the Liberal candidate for the riding of Scarborough. Salma Zahid, Member of Parliament for the riding of Scarborough Centre and the Liberal candidate. It's great to be here, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank Harvey Mendoza of Women Act for organizing this and providing me the opportunity to be here. It's a very important election where we are, and I think gender equality is one of the topics very dear to my heart, and I am proud to be running as the Liberal candidate, a party which believes in gender equality and a party who has accomplished so much on gender equality in the last 4 years. I was the Vice Chair of the Standing Committee of the Status of the Women in the last Parliament, and I was part of the number of studies that made recommendations around the issues which the women face, and I was able to add, being a minority woman of color, I was able to add to the perspective the racialized women bring to the table. And together in the last 4 years we have achieved a lot, but I think it's important that we decide where we want Canada to head. Canada where we believe in gender equality. So in the last 4 years, under the leadership of our Prime Minister, ranging from gender balanced cabinet to unparalleled commitments to women and girls' education, we have demonstrated that it is an important agenda, but we have to move forward. And we are proud of our international feminist policy to make sure that one voice is heard, and we are a party which believes in women's choice always.
Hi everybody, thank you for having me here. I think it's really easy to take for granted the rights that we're afforded as women in Canada, but there's still many barriers that we face as women. That's why ensuring gender equality is one of the pillars of a green economy, because an unequal society is not sustainable. And I think that the rise of anti-abortion rhetoric is pretty scary right now. The Greens have always called for safe, legal abortion for anybody who needs it, and I think we should be moving forward on these issues, not backwards. Violence against women is still shockingly high in this country. Each year, over 40,000 arrests result from domestic violence, and that's only incidents that are reported. And the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous girls shows that we have a problem with keeping our women safe, especially those who are most marginalized. And another issue that undermines women and our equality is the lack of representation in many professions in upper management. And we also undervalue female-dominated professions. So there's still clearly a lot of things that need to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you. So equality is a fundamental belief in the conservative ideology. And one of the major things our party believes in is that equality is for everyone, whether you're a woman, man, or whatever you identify yourself with. It's important to talk about equality as well as, to me, I feel one of the biggest pressing gender issues that we have this day and age is what I refer to as the equity of opportunity versus the equity of outcome. And so what's happening is, we all believe that women should be at a certain place in the world. We all believe that women should be paid equally. We all believe that women should have rights, that women should be able to, practice whatever religion they want, should be able to, leave their homes. However, one of the things, however, we have to focus on is what the opportunity is, and how do we focus on giving people the opportunity. So we're not focused just on the outcome at the end where we're saying everyone should have equality, but we should focus on how do we get to that equality. And that stems in many different ways, and we're going to talk about it today. But look, when you're talking about equality, we're talking about everything from, socioeconomic status of women. We know women are one of the more poor and marginalized communities. We're talking about how to empower women through education. We know education is an important factor for improving violence against women. And there's other factors that we're going to talk about today, but I just wanted to say I'm really glad that I get to sit on this panel with all these amazing women here, because regardless of whatever party we're from and what our ideologies are, we're all here to make a difference. We're all here to improve women's empowerment and gender equality, and I want to clap for everyone that's here for that.
Prior to moving forward, I do want to do a land acknowledgement. So we are on stolen Indigenous land, and these are the original territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and acknowledging that we have to ensure Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous determination, and that is, of course, innately very much connected to gender equity. Also, before moving forward, I do want to acknowledge it is very much important to focus on women issues, but true gender equity acknowledges and recognizes also gender non-conforming, gender fluid, and gender non-binary folks. I think this discussion is increasingly important because we need to have these dialogues to push for transformative shifts to understand that gender equity and gender equality issues is about climate justice, is about economic justice, is about racial justice, it is about Indigenous rights, it is about two-spirit LGBTQIA+ rights, and so much more. These issues are interconnected. To be running for the NDP as a community organizer, I don't put that light to put my name on a political party. The reason why I chose the NDP is because we tackle the multiple issues. Audre Lorde, a Black revolutionary feminist, is quoted stating, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not lead single issue lives. There are multiplicities of women and our intersectionalities," right? And so we really have to ensure that we push for public education, we push for childcare, we push for healthcare, head to toe, including pharmacare. We push for all of these things, reproductive justice, because all of these things matter to each and every one of us. And we have to be in solidarity with women across all differences. And what we need is to have a government that is bold, that is transformative, and has the political will to ensure that we create the conditions so that we can all live and thrive and not just try to survive.
Before we go to the first question, what I'd really love to do is have us all acknowledge how incredible these women are to put themselves forward in the political process. It's not an easy thing to do. They are knocking on doors. They are working relentlessly, not always with great receptions, I'm sure. And it's a tough political climate out there right now. So it takes a lot of courage and a lot of guts to put themselves out there like that. And I have much respect for all of you and wish you all the best in this campaign. So we can give them a round of applause for that. All right, question number one. And Andrea, I'll start with you, and then I'll let you answer for a little bit, and then I'll ask the others to join in, okay? All right, so our first question. Rates of violence against women in Canada remain high. Some populations, including Indigenous women and girls, face staggering and disproportionate rates of violence. How can Canada concretely work to lower rates of violence against women?
Okay, this is a major issue. Femicide and gender-based violence is a real thing. Every 2.5 days, one woman or one girl is essentially murdered, right? And these rates even become higher disproportionately depending on racialized and especially Indigenous women. One of the things that we can really concretely do is we need, not patchwork, right? We need a national action plan that will dedicate and prioritize funding and money to women organizations so that every single person, every woman can have the services when they need it and where they need it. Accessibility is key. What we also need is to ensure that, our campuses, right? There's a lot of sexual violence that has been happening. I'm just finishing up at OISE at U of T, right? And a lot of people, no one's really speaking about this. We need a plan that will end sexual violence on campus and all spaces. We also need to increase federal funding for legal aid. So I used to work for Legal Aid Ontario as a client service specialist and taking applications. A lot of the domestic folks in regards to domestic violence, right? There's a threshold, but even that threshold for victims and survivors of domestic violence is ridiculously low, right? So we need increased and stable funding for legal aid programs. We need to promote domestic violence policies in the workplaces. We need a comprehensive plan that isn't just patchwork.
I'm going to open it up to everyone now. Feel free to join in, ladies.
I know gender violence continues to be significant, and in the last few years we have taken significant steps to make sure that women don't have to face gender-based violence, and ranging from passing legislation to ensure that all the federally regulated workplaces, including the Parliament bill, are free from harassment and sexual violence. We have invested $200 million across government to prevent gender-based violence and support survivors and families, and to create more responsive legal and justice system. So we have also invested into women and gender equality, $13 million in over 100 commemoration initiatives to honor the lives and legacies of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, including the LGBTQ2 and the Two-Spirit people. So this responds to the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls interim report, which was issued in November 2017. And on June 3rd, 2019, the Commission submitted its final report. So the Government of Canada is examining its finding in order to establish a holistic path going forward. And we have been investing into Canada's network of shelters and transition homes to ensure that those women who flee domestic violence have a place to go. And we have launched Canada's first national gender-based violence survey to collect information on safety in people and private spaces at work or online, and to collect data to intimidate partner violence. So these are some of the steps which we have taken in the last 3 years, but I think more work has to be done and we need to move forward.
Jasmine, I'm going to ask you, and then Hannah, you, how does your party and your views, do they differ in any way? Do you see things differently, or how you would like to move this conversation forward differently?
To be honest, violence against women, our party obviously doesn't support. Gender equality is something that we've now are really working on, especially in the sense that if you look at our government and you look at our current slate of candidates that we have in the upcoming election, we have about 106 women candidate, which is the first time that's ever happened federally for the Conservative Party, which I, would like to say that also shows that we're progressing forward as well as a party. And the women that we have are a reflection of the women in Canada. One of the things I want to talk about is that, we're talking about rates of assault and we're talking about gender-based violence. And the riding that I'm in right now is considered to be one of the second poorest ridings in all of Ontario. There's a lot, everybody's there middle to low income. We do have some nice areas, but one of the things I've realized, I've been getting involved a lot to determine issues related to gangs and how to advocate for that. And one of the things I've realized, even with gang prevention, it's part and parcel with women's violence, right? Because we're talking about, especially in those areas where you're looking at lower income, you're looking at immigrants, you're looking at ethnic minorities, not to say that all violence is based on those, but in this case, as we're talking, I met a lady who was 20 years old and by 25 had 5 kids. Her sons, because she didn't have the support, living in assisted housing, had to, her son, she would throw it onto the road in the sense that he would play with his friends. Well, long story short, her son many years later became part of a gang, and I soon realized that starts at the age of 5. Up until the age of 12. Now this woman, why I'm mentioning this is because this woman, her son being in a gang as he got older felt more intimidated. Even though he's 12 years old, even though he's 15-year-old, he's packing a gun. And this is back to violence. And so this, I believe, starts in the home. And I know we're government, and I don't believe that our place is to obviously interfere in everybody's family, but I think we really need to get to the root of the problem and say, how do we support violence, and where does it stem from? It's not as simple as abuse. It's, gangs, it's everything else. And as a community get together, and back to what you're saying about funding, what I've also soon realized, and the riding I'm in, there's 91 agencies that are all doing different things. And nobody's talking to each other. I believe we need more communication. I think more communication amongst organizations is a way to be, because we have so many resources. Why throw more money at a problem? Let's look at what we have, get these people to talk, and then let's see where we need to go. That's how I see it. So.
And we're starting to run out of time on this.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry.
You guys are great. Hannah, I'll let you have the last word on this.
Well, this is an issue that's really dear to my heart. My sister has just been getting out of an abusive relationship, and now she's become the single caretaker for her 4 children. And when she was getting out of an abusive relationship, she was using the shelter system, and they were so backlogged. It was impossible to find a place for her and her kids. And then once she got out of the shelter, it was even harder to find housing, So for women to feel protected and safe, they need to have places to go. They need to have housing. They need to have places they can bring their children. And we can't be discriminating on the fact that people are, single parents of color who are probably the last people that, a landlord wants to rent to. And that's why the Greens, we call to restore the shelter enhancement program with $40 million in funding over 4 years. And we want to increase shelter access and put $750 million towards rent supplements and shelter assistance. And same to what the NDP point was of having a national action plan to end violence against women. But we also need to recognize that this is a housing issue as well, and that we should legislate housing as a legally protected fundamental human right for all Canadians and permanent residents. Women have to have somewhere they can go and feel safe that is not nearby their abuser.
Can I quickly add to it?
Very quickly, and then we're going to move on to our next.
As my colleague said that housing is a human right, and we do recognize that housing is a human right. And it is first time in the history of Canada that the federal government has stepped up and formulated a national housing strategy, investing $40 billion on our national housing strategy to reduce homelessness and improve housing for Canadians. And at least 25% of that will be supporting women, girls, and their families.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to our next question now. And I am going to start, I guess, Jasmine, we'll start with you
Sure.
for the answer for this one. On average in Canada, women continue to earn, on average, 20% less than men, and make up the majority of minimum wage part-time workers and post-secondary graduates. How will you address women's income and employment inequality, particularly women from racialized communities?
When I first read this question, I wanted to ask about why is it specifically racialized communities? And the reason I ask this is because this is an issue for all women, pay inequity, right? It doesn't matter if you are a professor at a university, and that's where I come from. My academic background, I've seen professors who are brilliant, who have qualifications, who are getting paid less than their male counterparts. So what I'm saying is, I agree that pay inequity is something. Obviously, there is racial minorities who are not having employment inequality. However, I feel that we need to do more to really, to provide a tool for. It goes back to education. It goes back to how do we have to get women, and we have to create a rhetoric around women in terms of how to ask those questions. And I think one part of pay inequality is related to, we are not asking our bosses for more money, right? Because as women, we're supposed to, we're being a specific way in terms of the way we're raised. We have so many qualified women who are not getting past managerial positions. There's only 5% of CEOs in, I think, Canada that are in or in the high CEO range. So my question is this: if we're going to stop this, then this has to come from all levels. Not only does this have to come from government, but it also has to come from the CEOs in the companies. Not only women, but also men. Right? And this is a dialogue that needs to continue. And I believe it's the men who, and I have very strong men in my life, like my husband, who allows me in the sense that, he empowers me, not allows me, but empowers me to run for office when I have an 8-year-old at home, so.
I'm going to let Hannah jump in now in this conversation.
Yeah, well, I work in hospitality, and one of the things I notice in my workplace is that the women who are doing the lowest paying jobs are all single mothers, and they're all immigrants. And so, a lot of new immigrants are taking the lowest paying jobs, and we think that that's okay, and I think that a lot of the time they're choosing between taking care of their families and showing up to work. And I like to think around ideas of maybe a shorter work week and increasing the minimum wage so that people aren't so strapped between taking care of their lives and just showing up for work. But also something that the Greens are talking about is a guaranteed livable income for all people, and establishing that by talking to provinces, territories, and Indigenous communities and figuring out what is the adequate amount of pay for people in different parts of the country. This will allow us to be liberated from this day-to-day monotonous work that we've gotten into for the most part. And also we want to abolish tuition so that people can go back to school and upgrade their skills without being saddled with debt. And we all know that higher education gives you better results. We shouldn't have to be choosing between supporting our family and showing up to work.
Salma.
Pay equity is one issue I think we have been talking for a very long time. Equal pay for equal work is really very important, and I am very proud in the past Parliament we were able to pass equity legislation which helps to ensure equal pay for equal work in all the federally regulated workplaces and we also created a pay equity commissioner with enforcement power to ensure that the new legislation has teeth and it is not just another thing. So, but in addition to pay equity, we have taken some major steps to make sure that we encourage women entrepreneurs. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy, and we want to make sure that women entrepreneurs step up and start their businesses. So we started Women Entrepreneurship Fund, and we create first ever Women Entrepreneurship Strategy has allocated $2 billion investment that seeks to double the women entrepreneurs by 2025. Because I think when I talk to the constituents and when I talk to the women in my riding, they face many barriers to overcome to start a small business. So this women entrepreneurship strategy, an investment of $2 billion will make sure that we double the women entrepreneurs. In addition to that, it also includes Women Entrepreneurship Fund that will invest up to $100K in the women-led businesses. And I am a woman of color, and I know how important it is to make sure that marginalized women, the new immigrant women, are part of our economy. And through our immigration and citizenship in ministry, we have launched programs to help the visible minority women. Because it is really very important that all women contribute to the economy. And we can only be successful if women are a part of our economic system. And for that, we need to make sure that everyone is a part of that.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm going to move on now to Andrea.
Yeah, so we don't believe in pitting women against other women across our differences. With the NDP, we recognize structural barriers and systemic discrimination and how that may impact women differently dependent on their intersectionality with race, with sexual orientation, and many other things. And with government, we would definitely prioritize pay equity to put an end to gender-based wage discrimination and enforce pro-pay equity legislation for employers for that to be transparent. Also in regards to racialized women or peoples, conduct a comprehensive review of the existing employment equity regime to help close the racialized wage gap and ensure that we strengthen our labor laws and we ensure diverse and equitable hiring. In regards to intersectionalities with the two-spirited LGBTQIA+ communities, we'll also add sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression to employment equity. In regards to, we're aware that disproportionately women are contract workers, precarious employment, part-time work. We will ensure and place rules that require part-time and contract workers be compensated equally to full-time workers. We'll get rid of unpaid internships, right? Because that exploits so many people. And just as Greenspan mentioned, also push for a living wage, starting off with the minimum wage and pushing that to a living wage. There's many things that we can do, such as making employment insurance more flexible and making it easier to qualify for employment insurance.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going a little over time. I'm sorry, everyone, but I hope that this pace is going well for everyone and we're getting a good voice. All right. So our third question, and Hannah, I'll start with you, is childcare. And it remains one of the key barriers to women's full participation in the workforce. How will you ensure that all women in Canada have access to affordable, quality childcare?
Yeah, well, I think a big part of the discussion around the gender wage gap actually goes back to affordable childcare. And a lot of parents are forced to choose between their families and their careers. So one of the first steps is to strengthen our maternity and parental leave and make it more inclusive and better paid. But the Greens also want to ramp up federal childcare spending to at least 1% of our GDP, adding $1 billion each year until all children have access to high-quality universal childcare. And we also understand that having childcare near or within your workplace also does wonders for parents and children. And I've seen this work with my own sister. She's a doula, and she works in a space where she can bring her 2-year-old to work with her. And this has gotten her back into the workforce much earlier than expected. And it also allows her to stay close with my niece, and it gives better outcomes for both of them. So it's been really amazing for her. And we know that quality childcare has big social and economic returns, especially for supporting women in the workforce and strengthening children's health and their outcomes.
Thank you. Next.
Childcare is an important issue, and I think in order to provide opportunities to the mothers to come out and work, it's important that we create childcare spaces. So if re-elected, we have announced that we are going to make better before and after school care accessible and more affordable. We have already created thousands of new preschool childcare services, and we will be going to create up to 250,000 more for the kids under the 10 if re-elected. And I just want to indicate how important the Canada Child Benefit is and what difference it is making, because through our tax-free Canada Child Benefit in the last 4 years, we have been able to lift 300,000 kids out of poverty, and it has provided more money to those families who really need it. So it is benefiting 9 out of 10 families who really need help. And we believe that it is important that we continue on that. So that's why, if elected, we will increase the CCBE support even more, with 15% more money for kids under the age of 1. And we also made changes to the parental leave, and now the mothers or the fathers would have the ability to take parental leave up to 18 months, which used to be 12 months. So that was also created so that it allows the parents, because raising a child is the most important, I think, one can cherish for years. And when I came to Canada in 1999 with 1-year-old son, I was a stay-home mom for a few years. So I know how important it is to provide daycare facilities to the mothers so that they can go out and work.
Thank you. Andrea.
Yeah, so this is a striking issue, right? Folks have been trying to resolve this issue for many years, right? The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, one of their local main findings here in Toronto and GTA, it costs about a bit over $20,000 a year, right? Like, this is ridiculous. With the NDP, we would develop a national public universal childcare program. That's non-profit, right? We'll work with other levels of government and including Indigenous communities, because we need to also have culturally responsive and reflective childcare spaces. We're going to be able to ensure that care is inclusive and representative of those children that they're serving. And we also need to be bold and have the political will to tackle the super wealthy and the biggest corporations to ensure that that revenue gets reinvested back into communities. When we talk about child tax credit or child tax, all of those things, we're not actually looking at what is the main issue. What are the issues that are actually creating these conditions for families to be in poverty? We have a crisis of inequality, and this continues to grow and grow decade after decade, year after year. We need to get to the root causes. And universal childcare that's nonprofit is also one of those ways to tackle it.
Thank you. Jasmine.
So, childcare, so I'll start off with, I have an 8-year-old daughter. And in the last 8 years, I have finished my PhD, worked in politics, and now running for office. So it's been a crazy ride. But childcare is definitely one of those things that I feel is a barrier, or lack of childcare is a barrier to women who are trying to have a career, regardless if it's full-time, part-time, whatever it is, right? And I know the costs are astronomical. And see, the thing is, the problem is, I don't believe childcare is just simply as simple as saying, okay, let's put some more money into childcare, let's put some more money into facilities. I believe it's a lot bigger than that. I believe it's the fact that every Canadian nowadays is stretched. We are paying so much in taxes. Our money is going to the federal system, and our money is going into the current government, and what's happening is people are barely getting by. And so what we want to do with the Conservative government is, our plan is to get people ahead. Our role is, and our motto is it's time for you to get ahead. And why? Because we recognize that all the taxes and everything that we're paying are not going where they should be. So some of the things that we're going to do to support people getting ahead is the universal tax cut, which will cut an average, for the average Canadian family, more than $850 per year, which is a start. And this is the tax rate, depending on a single taxpayer, can save up to $440 a year. And this is a tax cut specifically targeted at taxpayers. So this affects everyone. So this is not only just help, but it affects parents as well. The green tax credit is something else that we're doing related to public transit. What we're trying to do is really try to support the family. And so if it means that, to improve environmental, to help with the environment, if we provide a tax credit for you if it makes it easier to take the bus, if it makes it easier to go somewhere, we're willing to do that. We're also scrapping the tax on maternity benefits. And I think this is a huge thing, giving new parents up to $4,000 to save up to their kids. To me, I find it interesting that we are paying taxes and then go on maternity leave and then are taxed again, which I know, realistically, I feel that's, not appropriate. And there's a bunch of other taxes, credits we're doing in terms of fitness tax, social tax. So in terms of access to childcare, right now our focus is mainly on all of Canadians, but I do recognize that it is an important issue. And as a mom and as someone who has struggled finding childcare, it will be something that I will look into 100% because it's important and it has affected me personally. So.
Okay. Salma has asked to jump in. I'm going to allow that, but if the other two of you would like to as well, I'll just give you guys a minute here, okay?
Just want to add, in the last 4 years, when we came into power in 2015, the first act of our government was to reduce taxes for the middle class Canadians and increase the tax on the wealthiest 1%. Through our policy of tax-free Canada Child Benefit and the increase in the GIS for the single income seniors, an average middle class family is $2,000 better off than what they were back in 2015. And we have said that if elected, we will reduce the taxes for the Canadians again, and they will benefit about $600 through increasing the tax exemption income, and also 25% reduction in the cell phone bills will save an average family of $1,000 a year.
Anybody want to jump in here?
Yeah. Okay, so let's keep it real. We've been in a system that's been going liberal, conservative, back and forth for decades on end. Y'all promised affordable childcare years ago. And in regards to even like tax cuts on the conservative end, once again, let's keep it real. It disproportionately benefits with folks on the higher income bracket, right? And so we really have to ensure that when we're receiving information, even from me, regardless of which party, let's always be fact checking and ensuring that we have the information so that on October 21st, we can make a decision based on what vision we have for Canada.
Yeah, and I would say too, just because you get a tax break back doesn't mean that that's where your tax money is going. It's not like you're setting aside this $200 is for my childcare next month. If we had free universal childcare, then you wouldn't have to be budgeting and considering, okay, am I allowed to go back to work or not because I can't afford to pay childcare at all. Just a little bit of money towards childcare is not enough to cover all of your childcare costs. And if you have more than one child, then what do you do?
So my question is this. So I understand what you guys are saying. I understand the ideology, but however, my question is this: where does the money come from?
And fossil fuel subsidies.
No. No, but realistically speaking, where does the money come from? Like, and as much as you're saying it's $2,000, it actually isn't. And I'm actually throwing out lit about how the within the government, the current government, it's if you look at the average income of Canadians and you look at the taxes we're spending, we are actually not, and as much we are actually not getting ahead. And also, if you look at the current way that the oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Sorry, go ahead.
See, we reduce the taxes for the middle class Canadians by increasing the taxes for the wealthiest 1% Canadians. Whereas Harper was sending checks of child benefit to millionaires, we stopped that and we introduced tax-free Canada child benefit, which is helping those families who really need the help.
Can I chime in
that's
on
the-
that?
Can I ask one question,
Yeah.
Leanne? There's been a lot of talk about a universal childcare and
For years.
childcare. They've talked about it for years. Karchan was going to introduce it. It failed. The Liberals lost the election. Is it affordable? Is it, like, how many millions, billions would it cost? Can this country afford that? Is it a realistic goal?
Well, that's why we're setting aside 1% of our GDP, and we want to put $1 billion every year for the next 4 years to increase access to childcare. And also, like, developed nations understand you invest in your children and then you get that money back down the line. You know, if we cared about the future of our country, we would be investing in children from the get-go. You know, why is it so hard to just send your children to affordable childcare? You know, it's like, if we invest now, then we'll get twofold back when those people are employed and educated and well off and supporting us and paying their taxes.
You know what? But that goes back to the whole thing that we're talking about now, and what you're saying is correct. It's gender inequality, though, and that's what it is, right? It goes back to the issue at hand. It's gender inequality because men, no offense to the men in this room, but in the olden
decisions,
right? They didn't, and these are the people that are making the decisions, or making the decisions for us, and that's why I think it's extremely important that we have women. No matter where you are, whatever
pro-women.
Exactly.
In their politics.
Exactly. I think so.
You are giving me the perfect segue to the final question.
As long as the
I
politics
think
are
we should
political.
open up the table a lot sooner, right? Sorry about that. That was good. Really great discussion. Okay. Last question. And it's from Andrea's first answer. Okay. So women remain underrepresented in the Canadian political system. Men, no offense, are making the majority of the decisions. Aw, do you feel on the spot?
Not all men.
How can we get more women elected into office? Andrea?
Well, I'm proud to be a part of the NDP. We're on track to have 49% of our federal candidates to identify as women among our other intersectionalities. With the New Democrats, we'll reform the electoral system and introduce legislation to encourage political parties to run more women candidates. But it's not just about voting more women into electoral politics. Let's keep this straight. Just because folks identify with our gender as a woman does not necessarily mean that their politics are pro-people or pro-women. We have to be critical and ensure that the women that we are electing into electoral politics are reflective of our communities across all differences, but also hold a politics that's for all of us, that leaves no one behind. And we have to also ensure that these spaces, I don't like using the term safe spaces, but we have to ensure that these spaces are equipped with a critical anti-racism, anti-oppressive lens. Because there's, by far, even in many, quote-unquote nonpartisan or multi-partisan organizations, there's a lot of things that we're not actually looking at systematically if we're trying to pretend that things aren't political. For instance, hashtag not so equal voice, right? We have to really understand that we have the power to take a critical lens and tackle these issues.
All right. I'm going to let you go next.
It has been great 4 years, but I had to face many hurdles being a woman. And I think it's important that we create an environment where women are encouraged to be in politics. Not just women, but we have to encourage minority women also. Being a woman of color, I had to answer some questions last year when I started wearing a hijab. I was questioned by the right-wing media that why I am taking my Islamic ideology to regions and all that. So the opposition tried to let me down when I went through some very big health challenge last year by putting out robocalls in my riding that the member of parliament is sick and there will be a by-election. So these sort of things can be so problematic as a family. Like, I'm a mother of two young boys, 21 and 19-year-old. Imagine the opposition doing robocalls saying that the member of parliament has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and there will be a by-election in this riding. What it would go when my kids were questioned in their school, what happened to your mom? So this is like my personal experience I went through, but I think it is important that we encourage women to be in politics, create an environment, and I'm proud that in the last 4 years I've been able to, many young women from different universities under the program Women in the House have been able to shadow me to see what the life of an MP is. I think it's important for all minority women and girls to see that there is a place for them. They should see that there are people who represent them. We are proud that diversity is one of our biggest strengths, but we have to show that diversity there in the parliament. So it's important that we create that environment and encourage. And it was a great, it was a very humbling to see 338 young girls taking the seats in the parliament and under the Women Equal Voice program. So this is what we have to show. We have to show a path that it is for everyone, and in Canada we can achieve anything.
Thank you. Hannah.
Yeah, we need to vote for more women, you know? We have to encourage women to get involved in politics in the first place. And I think it's really important to see role models that you can see yourself in. And I know for myself, when I first met Elizabeth May, she was so inspiring to me as a woman. And she was one of the first people who encouraged me to run as a candidate. And now I see young girls like Greta Thunberg up there talking, and she's reminding me that no single person is too small. You know, we need to get out there. We need to express our voices. We need to be proud as women. And I think the most important thing, too, is having a shift in the way we see women in society and starting to value feminine attributes as a strength and not a weakness. And I think that level of compassion is exactly what we need to address the climate crisis that we're in right now. And, you know, that's why gender equality is one of the green pillars. Because we need to get past these superficial boundaries that hold women back, and we need to ensure that there's representation in all levels of power.
Jasmine.
I think one of the biggest things that we need, one of the biggest ways we can get more women to get involved in politics, and I don't know how the Liberals or the NDPs or NDPs or Greens work, but one of the things we started doing, especially because in our party, as we all know, we've only more recently had more women who are running, and we're really encouraging that. And provincially, one of the things we did is we created this Women in Politics group where we're empowering women to get involved in campaigns. We created training material for them. We told them what it was like to be a campaign manager, if you wanted to get involved, how can you get involved? And so we've been doing this because we're encouraging more women, and actually that's how I came to be where I am. I joined politics a year and a half ago, because I was passionate and I wanted to get involved, and now I'm running as a candidate, and I owe it to the strong women who empowered me. I owe it to the strong men who empowered me, and I think that it's to have more leaders. You need to have, I think as women, and it saddens me sometimes because I feel like we need to really mentor other women more. I don't think we're doing that enough. And, you know, part of the problem I realize it is, when you look at it, is that we don't have as many women who are in higher positions to do so, right? And so it seems like it's a constant uphill, but you know what? Compared to 35 years ago, I think we've all accomplished a lot, everyone in this room, right? And so I think for politics with anything, if you if you're willing, and like you guys, I think we all believe in this, but if you believe in something and if you're a woman, then don't ever let anyone ever stop you. Because at the end of the day, all those little voices that you hear are, shouldn't stop you. And I think women like ourselves need to mentor women that have those little voices in their head, that are strong women. I mean, we're all strong women, all four of us, right? And it's important to really pay it forward. I think that's what we need. So.
All right. Anybody want to jump in on that, or can we move on to audience questions? All right. I think you're kind of all in agreement on that.
You were all like, oh,
Take the mic. Thank you.
White privilege only at the front, yes.
Love that joke.
It was hand up first, so
Membership has its privileges, trust me. I'm sure you all read the article in the Star yesterday about domestic homicide. No, there you go. This article yesterday, Marina Dawson, it's the Canadian Prevention around domestic homicides. Have a look at it, please. I would really appreciate that. I think we'd all really appreciate that. Marina Dawson from University of Western was interviewed. This is going to lead to a question. The rates of domestic homicide, and when I say domestic homicide, what they're really saying is women and children, right, killed by their partners, has not decreased at all. In fact, it has increased with marginalized, Indigenous, First Nations, and Métis folks, newcomers, and so on. So while I'm old and skeptical, I will tell you, and I hear all these promises, we live in a province that has not funded any programs or updated any programs. I'm looking to my girl Harmony here to help me with this, for men who use violence, right? We continue to live in a province that has a PAR group that hasn't been funded or updated in, how many years are we into now? 15 years.
it's had its funding cut recently.
It has had, thank you, it has funding cut, and we have a judicial system, and I'm not about locking up all guys, that's not the solution. And I'm also don't think that women should have to leave their homes, right, to feel safe. So my question is, if you could comment on the need for interventions for men who choose to use violence against women, and your thoughts on that in terms of programs.
We'll start at this end of the table. And
Thanks
I
for,
think I'm going to let you open up the table, and you can all jump in and
okay.
thanks for your question, and I recognize that it is, we have seen many incidents, and it is important that we take action against gender-based violence. So that's why we invested $200 million in programs to prevent violence against women, and that also helps in creating more receptive legal justice systems to make it easier for the victims to come forward, which is really very important. And many times we see that the victims don't come forward. And it's important that we make sure that all the Canadians, and especially the women, have access to legal aid. That's why we felt like when the legal aid was cut now by the present provincial government, the federal government stepped up and announced legal aid, because I think it is really very important that the women have access to the legal aid in case they need it. And it's important to make sure that if in case they have to leave their house, there are shelters, there are places where they are welcomed. And I know that providing money for the shelters under the National Housing Strategy is there, and we want that there should be more shelter spaces in case the women have to flee violence, they can have a place to live.
who else would like to weigh in on this?
I would say too, like one of the things that Greens call for is a ban on assault rifles and handguns, even though that's not the full picture of violence that's committed against women, but that's like a start in addressing one of the easiest ways to cause death. But this is also an issue of mental health, and having more funding for mental health services and making sure that we're addressing our men and we're holding them equally responsible, but everyone responsible, and giving them adequate services so that they can go talk to people, get the help they need, avoid these acts of violence that happen in the worst case scenarios when you're in a fit of rage. If we were intervening before these things got so bad and people knew they had places to go and people to talk to, and it wasn't so expensive to just get the mental health services that we need. And so We call for $100 million in investment to mental health strategies and suicide prevention in our budget.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the larger issue, and we do have funding in regards to other programs that may be necessary, but it speaks to the larger issue in regards to toxic masculinity, right? There's hardly any educational awareness, even within our boys and young men, or let alone seniors, about toxic masculinity, and that it's not an attack on all men, right? It's not that we're anti-man, it's just talking about that there's forms of masculinity that are inherently toxic, and that's where that abuse about like, oh, boys can't cry or men can't cry, and what does that do to our boys when there aren't any other, like what you were mentioning, like in regards to support such as mental health services, or why aren't these things spoken within our educational system, right? So it speaks about a larger both ideological and culture shift that no one particular program or action plan could actually combat, right? It speaks to us as our responsibility as community members, our collective responsibility to call toxic masculinity out and to have those brave and courageous conversations with the men and with the boys that are in our lives. Like how are we raising young men? How are we raising our boys, right? So I think it also speaks to that larger shift.
And to that point, like, we need proper sexual health education, and we need to be teaching consent in schools from a young age. We need to like identify from a young age, before people are even getting physical, what is the right way to conduct yourself with the opposite sex, so we can't be rolling back education around young children and the idea of consent.
I think we have all seen that the crime, especially we have seen in the GTA and the city of Toronto, crime has been on increase, and we have committed that if elected we will ban military-style assault rifles and will work with the city of Toronto ban handguns. My question would be to the candidate from the Conservative Party, what would be their position on the gun control?
Yeah, 100%.
Do they believe in tougher gun control?
Yeah, we do. But we believe in tougher gun control for...
what would be your position
not
on
for,
banning assault rifles?
Not for the...
What would be your position on banning assault rifles?
Well, I will let you know when you let me speak.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, for us, we believe that legal gun owners are not the problem. They're not the problem. Because let me tell you why, ladies and gentlemen, for the comments.
Research? Sorry, this is based on evidence.
Let me tell you why, right? Because most of the guns that are coming here and the gun violence, and I was just literally there yesterday with the gang unit, is coming from illegal guns. And regardless of the fact, and I'll tell you this, and I've seen this, and I'm gonna give you a parallel in something else that I know very well, and I'm gonna explain to you where because, for example, think about it this way. Think about a child. Think about, I'll explain it in this concept. So one of my areas of expertise, just off the topic for one quick second, but it's part of this, is that I'm into environmental conservation, specifically about elephants. Elephants have tusks, ivories. They've been killed for years. Ivory is really bad. They made the ivory trade illegal, right? Now it has tripled. It has tripled. So what I'm saying to everybody here is I don't believe that banning is the solution. I think that we really need to enforce. We should have harsher punishments for people who have offensives with weapons, so they shouldn't be let out right away, and that's what we're doing. We need to classify gangs in the criminal code. If you could imagine, that's not there, so that needs to be done. And so I personally, to answer your question, do not believe, and the stats have shown that most of the violent crimes are from illegal guns, all in the city.
I think Danforth shooting is very fresh in everyone's mind, and the lives which we lost summer of 2018 is very fresh. I think it's time to move on and take some action which shows that we can stop the crime. And I think the ban on the assault rifles and working with the cities, with the municipalities on a ban on handguns is really the need of the hour. I think we are sisters, we are mothers, and we have lost many lives to the crime.
I think when you mentioned that crime is on a rise, I think there's a failing in that comment, sister, because the reality is, while crime has reduced in its numbers over the years across Canada. The one specific crime that continues to increase is the crime against women. More than gun violence and more than all these other types of violence that keeps getting mentioned, that is not focusing on why we're here and to talk about women's issues. So what I'm very interested in knowing about is that the women who've been involved in government for some time, what have you done to raise with your parties the issues that directly impact domestic violence against women, gender-based violence, because that is the crime nationally rising every single year against women.
We have taken steps to stop gender violence, and we have invested over 200 million in different programs to prevent violence against women. And Minister Monsef has done a lot of work on this to make sure that we invest in programs to make sure that the violence against women goes
I guess,
down.
I'm sorry I don't want to do a back and forth because it's really Cynthia is the host here. But just to be mindful, the question is asked because it's rising. So something is not working for whatever government's doing. So what do you and any of the candidates at the table have planned to reduce gender-based violence across Canada?
Go ahead, Hannah.
One of the things that the Greens have really championed is making sex work legal and public. And this gets back to this gender-based violence against women. A lot of women who are operating and doing sex work are operating underground. It leaves them vulnerable to a lot of harm. They're not able to screen who it is that they're meeting with. It puts them in danger. And so kind of to the idea of when you regulate something, or if you're, making it illegal, that actually makes the problem much worse. And then we can't address issues around, trafficking and child trafficking and these kinds of abuses. So it's important that we make it safe and legal, and we give women the option to operate above the board rather than pushing them into these back alleys where they're in harm's way.
But if I may interrupt, ladies, and I would hope all of you would jump in. Just last week or the week before, a woman was murdered by her partner as she's leaving a relationship with a machete on a suburban street. What can be done by governments, by your parties, to stop those kind of incidents that are truly horrifying?
I just want to say, it speaks to in regards to the National Action Plan and actually committing and prioritizing funding to a multitude of programs, right? And one of those things that ends up happening is we have a crisis of inequality, right? There are so many women that are dependent on their partners, that are even afraid that take them so long to get to that point where they could even say, let me try and leave, right? We have a state of crisis, whether it be, folks had mentioned in regards to housing affordability. Women disproportionately are impacted by not having medication covered, right? Having pharmacare, having mental health services, vision and dental care, a fair living wage, right? So that we are not in these conditions to be stuck and dependent on someone, right? In addition to having those programming and services. I do want to just reverse back a bit because I want to do kind of a fact check. We cannot be acting fresh on gun violence. These have been ongoing issues from time. There are reports upon recommendations collecting dust on people's shelves right now because they know you can make an election issue by pretending to be tough on law and order, right? We need to get to the roots of gun violence, which is also an extension of gender-based violence. These root issues, we have to tackle poverty and all these other issues so that our youth can also feel hopeful and that there is a vision in the future for them.
I'm wondering if we can get another question from the audience. So we'll do you and then you next.
Okay, so my question is basically about women with disability issues and what are your plans to help with issues when it comes to disability and accessibility when it comes with women?
Is there a particular candidate you would like to hear from first?
It's pretty much for any candidate.
Open to all.
I'm very proud that we passed the disability legislation, and we want to create an inclusive Canada. And we do recognize that it is really very important to provide opportunities to those people who have some form of disability to overcome those, and we create at the workplace, otherwise an inclusive environment for every Canadian, including the women who are with disability. So I think it's disability legislation is a great step towards that.
Well, I think this gets back to the point around a guaranteed livable income, something that puts all of us on a better footing, and then it allows people, especially people who have disabilities or otherwise wouldn't be able to be in the workforce regularly, to feel comfortable, to be able to afford their housing. And also we want national pharmacare, so you're not paying crazy fees for the basic needs just to keep you alive and thriving, So the combination of having pharmacare, but also a guaranteed livable income, it sets all of us up with better opportunities, and it also allows anybody who is living with a disability to be free of this kind of stress and burden of trying to get back into the workforce if it's not feasible for them.
One of the things I've noticed, actually talking when I was going through my riding and being in the city of Toronto, is that it's actually really hard. There's a lot of issues with accessibilities for people with disabilities. And I didn't realize that. And actually the other day, I was talking to a constituent that I met, and we were talking about this issue. And to be honest, I wasn't aware of it. But there's something that I'm really looking into, because when I was talking to him about it, he was telling me about how hard it was for him to just, get into a store. And these are things, what I don't understand is we've been working, back to what we've been saying, we've been working on these things for a while. How come it's still there, right? And with everything, it's something that needs to obviously progress. But it's something that I actually am looking into. That, and why with low income seniors, like back to the income and the poverty line and women in poverty, we have a lot of women who are retiring who are single moms, even single moms with disabilities who are struggling to get by now. They were struggling when they were single moms, and now even more so as seniors. And I think it's important that we really address that in the future. But
Yeah, we definitely have to realize that we are institutionally and structurally accommodating fully able-bodied, right? And in regards to the New Democratic Party, it will uphold the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and strengthen the Accessibility Act. And once again, it speaks to the notion of like many things are normalized, right? That we think that, oh, well, we could just all use the stairs, or we don't need ASL interpreters, right? Or we don't need Braille at even what's the accessibility even within these spaces, even though there are elevators and ramps, right? Not every disability is visibly, right? And so it speaks to the larger issue on needing to uphold United Nations Convention so that we can truly have a fully accessible space for everyone.
Okay, I really want to try and get another question we promised you.
Hi, I'm Priyanka. It's nice to hear all of you. So just going back to sexual assault and harassment on campus, and there's a lot of sexual assault policies on how to support the victim, and a lot of services regarding supporting the victim. But there's not enough support regarding how to mandate policies when it comes to the perpetrator, when it comes to the person who's harassing and sexually assaulting individuals on campus. So what are your interventions in terms of maybe looking at policies that support the victim, and also, I guess, educate the perpetrators as well? Yeah.
Who wants to start, or are you all going to jump in at the same time?
I think it's important that we create awareness among young boys and men also, and because I think we need their support and we need to educate them I think in order for women to be successful, we have to make sure that those men who are around that are supportive of the initiatives which women take. Like who I am today and where I am, I don't think so I would have been possible without the support of the men in my life, starting from my father, who believed in equal opportunities for his daughter like his sons, and my two brothers, and now most importantly my husband and my two sons. If my husband didn't provide the support in the last 5 years for my political journey, it would have not been possible for me to even do this. So I think it's important that we include young boys and men in that awareness and education program.
You know, this is the difficult thing too, because we're in a culture of, you know, shaming people, and people feel afraid to even say what they've done or admit that they've done something wrong. But we also have a culture where we don't believe women, and so it's easy to get away with these things because you're immediately questioning a woman's character over her lived experience. And you know, like, we need to have space for people to be honest and to be held responsible, but we also need to have a society that forgives and gives people the chance to, you know, learn and adapt and move on with their lives, because it doesn't serve anybody to, you know, demonize somebody for one wrong action, just as it doesn't serve us to demonize women or judge their character for even admitting to, you know, being caught up in any assault or any situation, you know. And this goes back to having the right kind of mental health services and counseling, and having structures in place where people can go and talk and get counsel. But it is also really important that we hold those people accountable, and that no, they're not allowed to keep going to school, or they, you know, they have to pay some sort of consequence, but it doesn't mean that they can never be forgiven and now they're on the blacklist and they're like, you know, a sex offender for the rest of their lives. Like,
Andrea?
Yeah, well, I also want to highlight that, okay, so in regards to the times that I've been sexually assaulted, I've never once gone to a police officer, right? So the person who is, like, quote unquote the perpetrator would not ever be identified as such, right? And so I think in regards to the intricacies of these issues, because unfortunately our court system and police officers do not have the appropriate training. You know, I had even called into in regards to, like, an assault hotline, and the person was victim blaming me. Thank goodness, as a community organizer, I already know what they were trying to do, and be like, oh, well, why didn't you move? Oh, well, why didn't you say no? When my action was to freeze, right? And so it's about the educational component, which is huge. Education and programming for our youth to understand, like, connecting it back to consent, and what are healthy boundaries, and what are healthy relationships, like bringing it back to basics. Meanwhile, you know, a comprehensive plan still having programming, still holding folks accountable for their actions, meanwhile still having that restorative piece. Because too many instances, most of the women that I know that have been sexually assaulted have not gone through a formal complaint, right? And so what happens when us folks are not seen as, you know, survivors, or as the perpetrator, nothing actually happening because no one actually knows it happened, right? So it's like looking at also the nuances and complexities on how we can fully have a comprehensive plan.
Jasmine, I'll give you the final word, and we're hoping to get another question in back here.
Sorry, just to go back. So you were talking about support for victims and educate perpetrators on campus, on campuses. So I think it starts with right from the minute the person, I think it starts in terms of when you're trying to set a precedence or tone for these kind of issues. I think it should start right from the beginning. So when you are giving your letter of, when you're getting your letter of acceptance or whatever, even re-outlining, you know, the university, it doesn't have a harassment policy, blah, 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 blah. When you're getting to Frosh Week, re-emphasize, issues that can happen during Frost Week, right? Create programs where, about safety, about these issues, because I know it happens. I've heard of it as well, like being on campus, especially when you have alcohol involved, you have young, students coming in, they're excited and whatever, and things can get out of hand. So yeah, and I think also being active on campus and really promoting well-lit areas, right? Safety phones. I know a lot of campuses are doing this, but even rides, rides between buildings, that kind of stuff. In terms of the perpetrators, I believe that I feel like and I agree with these two ladies that, and I think we've all had our own experiences, and it's what's interpreted to be assault, but education, I believe, and back to women's poverty and women's empowerment and creating gender equality, education is the biggest key, right? And really promoting, like you said, the culture of respect, I think, between women and men and on campus and families, and it's something that I guess transcends. It's so complex, right? It's not as simple as saying, and you guys have all hit the nail. I'm trying not to repeat everything that you say, but I agree that we have to, especially on violence on campus, really, it's a big issue. So really put into practice those things. And if you want to talk more about other stuff, we can, because I've lived half my life on campuses, so.
Can we get one more question? I know we've gone over time, I apologize, but
I know I have to
really
go.
love to get ahead of
Because
this.
like thank you for interesting right now.
Hi, my name is Anjum, and one of the issues that's been a big topic of conversation in Toronto has been a potential gender equity strategy and a gender equality office at the City of Toronto, because the fact of the matter is, more than half of the population identifies as a woman or a non-binary person or a gender diverse person, yet our budget, which is in many ways a political document, doesn't actually give money to our communities where we are the majority actually in the City of Toronto. So I'd like to know how would your government actually look at gender when it comes to funding, when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to creating public policies, because we know that the current way of doing gender neutral policies is actually oppressive to women and gender diverse people. So that's something we're talking about in Toronto, and we'd like to hear, Millennial Women in Policy would like to hear what the federal government has in store for that.
Can I start?
Sure.
Okay. So we introduced for the first time gender-based analysis for the budget, and the government recently renewed its commitment to GBA Plus and is working to strengthen its implementation across all the federal departments. And the government is keen on achieving gender equality by closing the key gaps between diverse groups of women, men, and non-binary people. Gender equality benefits everyone in our society, and GBA Plus can improve the situation of women and men and non-binary people. So it is really very important. So all the departments in the federal government give a gender lens. And I'm proud of Minister Morneau, who made sure that every department takes into account what the women need. And I think through different policies, making life easier for the middle class women, we have made our commitment to the women through our different policies of investing into Canadians. The poverty rate has gone low, and over 850,000 Canadians have been lifted out of poverty. Initiatives of increasing the GIS supplement and our commitment to increase the OAS by 10% and the survival benefit by 25% if elected, the majority of the people who will benefit will be women out of that.
I don't know, this just kind of makes me think of the idea of like how most women, they menstruate, but we have to pay for those products. Whereas, like, if that was something that we all did, we would make it free. And it seems ridiculous that we're, like, forced to pay for something we cannot control. And we shouldn't have these kinds of barriers to access for basic goods that only women use, or people who identify as women would use. We should have those things be accessible, and that goes back to, having universal pharmacare and having these guaranteed incomes and having like universal childcare, these kinds of things that are helping lift up women and giving them the things that they need, rather than having them pay, like, you know, for a lot of feminine based products as well, like we're paying extra when it's the same generic product that a man would use, but because it's advertised towards women, it's a little bit more. You know, we have to like look at those things critically and say, why are we forcing women to spend more on basic products just because they're women, you know?
Okay, Andrea?
So, to be fully transparent, I don't know necessarily, because you are asking what is the amount, and like if we get like a gender equity office or something like that. Like I know Toronto's doing that with like being led by Christine Wong Tam, but so I wasn't sure of the question. If you could just quickly rephrase it.
So basically, that's a current hot topic in Toronto, and many people in this room are following that conversation. So applying that now at the federal government level, what would your government, or what would you do if elected, when it comes to having a gender lens on issues like budgeting, things like policies, things like processes? Because currently, if we look at a policy from a gender neutral lens, what happens is it defaults to what works for men or what works for the dominant gender. But having actually a gender neutral lens, a gender lens, I'm curious to see what different parties have in terms of their position on that.
Okay, so we have a platform that's 109 pages, and I don't recall anything speaking to that particularly, but I can speak to you in regards to as a community organizer, and I guess in regards to being elected is to push that any type of legislation or any type of processes not only has like that the gender lens, right, and non-binary, right, but the anti-racism lens, the anti-oppression lens, all of those things, because at the end of the day, exactly what you're saying, like, ain't nothing neutral. Nothing is absolutely neutral. Everything is political. And so by the way that we make particular decisions, that can definitely disproportionately impact particular populations because we didn't take a particular lens into account. So I'm not sure if that really answered, but yeah.
Jasmine, I'll give you the final say.
Yeah, we don't have as well something specific to that right now, as far as I've seen. However, I do want to talk about the concept of lens, right? Because I understand what you're saying about a gender lens, but my question is, when we're looking at gender lens, then do we also look at a racial gender lens? Is there, and how, the other thing is also, right? The other question is, do we also, we're looking at it that way, and then on top of that, it's, to me, how do we account for, like you're talking about how legislation is not meeting with gender, like the gender lens is not reflecting that, right? But my question is, it's also, even if you look at, okay, so we're all Canadian, right? What does it mean to be Canadian? Can everybody define what that is exactly? So what I'm saying is, we have different people that are coming here from different countries, right? And we're looking at legislation, and I've seen this even with like standardized testing and so on and so forth, right? The question is, where do you draw the line? I don't know. I'm trying to understand in terms of, if you have a gender lens and you have a female lens, and then you have one, say someone's from India, they may not understand something this way, or someone's from China and they, no, I'm not against, no, I'm not. I'm just trying to understand, like, how do we do that as well as also reflect everybody else's cultural identity as a gender, right?
I think I can answer.
Do you know what I
that.
mean? Like,
No,
I'm trying to understand, like.
So as a social justice educator, when we center the voices and the experiences of those mostly in the margin that are most negatively impacted,
right,
it ends up being automatically inclusive to all other peoples. And so if our lens right now, straight up, is generally through cisgender, heterosexual, white, rich, or middle income. That's our lens, right? Stereotypically, structurally. But once we take and value people's lived experiences that are fully at the margins, it ends up being good for all of us.
So here's the dilemma, because we could go on for a lot longer. We were supposed to end 20 minutes ago, but we're still going strong. So I guess my question is, do we want to do another question? We're also supposed to give each person 2 minutes to summarize. So I see somebody back there who really wants to answer a question. Okay.
So, I mean, politicians will come to us and sell their, whatever party they come from. I think we need to mobilize ourselves and make sure that we don't do what happened in Ontario. We need to make sure we mobilize and we vote so that we can get the right people to be our representatives. Even when we hear the discussion today, I'm sure a lot of us have made our minds, right? So go out there and vote for the right people. That's what really matters at the end of the day.
Well said.
I have a very quick yes/no question to all the candidates.
Okay.
Hopefully, would any of you support legislation that would deprive a man from ownership of a house, or and give it to the woman who has been subject to assault and violence? Would any that will probably solve issues with shelters, with inequality, and so on? Any similar type of legislation, would you consider supporting it?
And you want to
Yes, no.
yes or no?
A yes or no?
Okay.
What are you, a reporter? In the interest of time, that's why.
So, can you please repeat,
What I mean, we understand that currently men who subject women and their children to violence, probably the court system is not strong enough to help the women to the extent to which they need help. And also a lot of women just don't go and report this because they're financially dependent, because they have to live in the same household, because they don't have too many options. If there is legislation that, in addition to the punishment for the violence against the women, would also have financial implications on the men and would deprive them from the property, which is the home of the family, exclusively because they have committed violence against their family, would anything similar be considered in one form or another to empower women and to also give the message to the men that there are actually consequences which go beyond simple slap on the hand?
I think it's important that we say no to domestic violence, and it's time that we take concrete actions to make sure that these women are not subject to domestic violence. And for that, we need to create financial stability among women and programs where women have that financial stability. Because if women have financial stability, they would be able to stand up to domestic violence.
But I think, may I push you a little bit on this? I think what they're saying is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if a woman is the victim of domestic abuse and she's been living with her husband, her partner in that house, and she has nowhere to go, very often the man gets to stay in the house. Would you change legislation to give her the right to be in the house, so she's not the one in a shelter, she's not the one who's homeless, trying to take care of children?
I think it's important that we make sure that women can stand up against domestic violence, and there has to be some serious consequences for those men who.
Would you consider
Yes, I think definitely we definitely need to look into that.
I think it's an interesting idea. Like on the face of it, I think that's an exciting idea. My only hesitation is to break down, going after men and making such a barrier between the genders that we're pitting genders against each other. I think that can be dangerous if it's taken to the wrong extent. I think it's more about.
If the woman is the perpetrator, she can, regardless of the gender, if the woman is the perpetrator.
Yeah, I like the concept of it. I would hope that it wouldn't be, abused to then make things unequal in the reverse, I don't think that we should address this issue by attacking men. I think there's better ways of lifting up our women and making them feel safe without making all men the enemy, or no. I don't think it is. I just wouldn't want it to devolve into that. I feel like people would get very upset.
Do you have a question? Can I let the others finish first, or do you want to?
I think right now there is something within the judicial system that gives women the exclusive possession of the home. But for that to happen, the judge has to award that. That's not like what you want, but it's a start. It's something that exists now, but it doesn't happen as often. Partly because being in the home doesn't guarantee the safety. So we have to have other systems in place for that to be successful. We want to make sure that the woman is at home and safe, right? I just want to ask one very basic. I think my question is the most basic question. Let's go to the basics. The P word.
We still have to answer that one, and then can we get it right back to you? If that's okay.
If we can, just hold that question, hold that thought just for a moment. We have two more down here. Jasmine, let's start with you. Your response to this question.
That's a tricky question, but what you have just told me makes me realize that, women really, really need support, and we really need to educate people about this. I wasn't aware that this is happening. I was aware, I have a friend of mine who is getting divorced, and it was a really messy situation, and the judge mandated for him to live in the house, and he was seeing a woman and bringing her there, and they had kids, and that was insane. So I hope that we can have more conversations, and I think we should create more awareness about this. In terms of whether or not I agree that should be done, I think all solutions need to be considered, right? If that's the solution that would make sense, then it should be considered. But I think that decision needs to be made when we can see everything that's there, everything that we're aware of once we get elected.
Andrea.
Yeah, so that per se isn't specifically in the platform, because I do want to be transparent in regards to, folks being decision makers. What is in our platform is in regards to survivors and or victims should have access to the services and supports they need, such as counseling, referrals, police, and court-related services, and the voice in decisions that may impact their safety. And so although that may not be in a platform, within this context that you provided a heterosexual relationship context and the perpetrator to be known to be the male, the aggravant. Myself personally, I would support this, because we do need increased measures and accountability measures, because too many instances, even with the court system, one of my homegirls was trying to get out of an emotionally abusive relationship, and it took the longest, and ended up having to sell the house and all these other issues when there's a lack of accountability and measures.
I'd love to hear your question.
Here's the most basic issue, the P word, which is patriarchy. How about applying a patriarchal lens in everything and then removing it? What are your thoughts on patriarchy? I mean, everything that you've talked about today has the root in patriarchy. But yet, the most basic concept is not really, we're not talking about patriarchy anymore. Why are we not talking about patriarchy? When it's the root of all.
And white supremacy.
Patriarchy is at the base, right? So what are you doing about that? About removing patriarchy from our systems, from our policies, from our relationships? What are your stance on that? This is the most basic.
Yeah, I love that.
Anyone?
Well, I can tell you that I've been married for 18 years. I decided to keep my maiden name. Talking about patriarchy, right? And it's interesting, even this day and age, that people still ask me, "Oh, you don't have?" So they'll meet my husband and be like, "Oh, Mr. Rattan, no, his last name is something else, right?" and and I remember going to the States and I was getting harassed, like not harassed, but the lady's just like, oh, why don't you keep the same last name? Because my husband went to go pick up a package that we had at the hotel. He couldn't pick it up because we didn't have the same last name. And it was just, and we're like, we're married and it's ridiculous. But what you're saying is, so in terms of patriarchy, what I'm doing, things like this, empowering my daughter, talking to my daughter about the role of herself in society, the role of how she should treat people, how she should be treated by other people, what she should stand up for, being a strong role model. And I know it's way more deep-rooted than that, and I believe it's so endemic in our system that it's something that to overcome, it would take years. But I think slowly, all of us at one point, I feel like I'm trying to do it slowly one day at a time. So,
Is your party doing something?
is my party doing something about patriarchy? Well, I think we're in the right step. We are now up to 106 candidates, right? I think that the voices of the women that are coming there are women that are representative of women in this room. So in terms of my party, it's a step in terms of a way to, let's have more women at the table so we can have these discussions. So.
Yeah, I want to just say, there's this thing of internalized sexism, right? Because of the patriarchy in regards to structurally and fundamentally, even in this country, right, has continuously devalued women and gender nonconforming folks, right? And that's why we ain't got no gender equity lens up in our processes, right? And policies and legislation, right? Because fundamentally women continuously are undervalued. And I think if we are really, uniting against, when we say we're uniting against sexism, fundamentally then we must be fighting against patriarchy, right? Because out of patriarchy also comes toxic masculinity and comes gender-based violence. So if we're not actually trying to dismantle these policies and processes that are embedded within our system, and then we're not really getting to the root core to really abolish and remove gender-based violence. Just because in transparency, once again, the platform doesn't really mention patriarchy. It does speak to about, seeking to dismantle white supremacy. And patriarchy also is very much intertwined with white supremacy. It doesn't mean that the NDP, we have all the answers, because it's very much ever evolving. And I don't think any political party has the answer, but I think it really comes out in regards to what are our concrete steps and what's our lens that we're actually using when we are seeking to dismantle these systems.
Salma, would you like to?
Yes, I think I view that it's important that we empower women and start that right from the beginning. As a parent, I think it's important that we tell them, convey this message that their own identity is important and empower them, and always stand up for equal rights for young girls, for women. And I'm proud that we as a party stand for equal rights for all women, and we want to advance gender equality, and we are always committed to always strongly defending women's right to choose also. So we have to create an environment when women feel secure, safe, and free of violence.
I think we need to smash the patriarchy. And, we as women, we also have to recognize when we are perpetuating the patriarchy. A lot of women are oppressing 100%. Fellow women by, boxing them into how they should look or how they should act or what is the right or wrong ways to behave as a woman. So it's just having more women in power doesn't, necessarily address it, because those can be the same women who are holding back the progression of the gender, and everyone who does not conform to one gender or one, orientation. And so, we need to go back to valuing feminine attributes. We need to see femininity as equal. A lot of the oppression that the LGBTQ community faces is because they're associated with female attributes, So it goes back to this really deeply rooted fear and hatred for women that's been happening since, the dawn of time. So we have to recognize that as 50% of the population, we bring 50% of the beauty and the growth and the innovation and the creativity and the compassion. And places with more female leaders, they're doing bold things and they're taking care of their people better and they're less violent and they're like pushing forward these social programs, the kinds of things that we think of as women, especially as the lead caretakers in a lot of our homes. So there's so much that we have to do, and gender equality is a pillar of the Green Platform. And it goes back to what I said at the beginning. If we do not have equality, we cannot have a sustainable future. It's not sustainable to be holding one gender back while we're pushing up the agenda of the patriarchy. So.
Thank you. Thank you. So, unless anybody has a question they have to get in, I think we'll start summing it up. And I know that some people had... Okay. Are we okay to do one more real quick? One more. Okay, last one. We'll cut it off here. Okay.
A fast comment in terms of, I don't think domestic violence is just for the lower class. Case in point, the female doctor that was killed last year or 2 years ago, whatever it was, by her husband who was a doctor. 1. 2, what are the parties doing about the sandwich generation? Because as females, a lot of us are going to be caregivers. I was a caregiver. We're looking after our parents who are aging, and then, there are kids we're looking after, there's a house we're looking after, there's a husband that somehow needs some caregiving too. There's a job that we want to do for our career. So what are the parties doing to assist in that?
And I'm going to ask you to sum that up.
The sandwich.
Let's ask you to sum that up in about 20 seconds each, okay? Let's keep it to the point real quick, okay? Because I think I'm hoping that you'll stay and the people who are still here can actually talk to you individually if there's time at the end of the evening, okay?
I think it's important, you have raised a very important question, that we have to balance our life. We have to work and we have to look after our aging parents and we have to take care of our children. So women have more responsibility. So that's why I think it's important that we create opportunities so that they can have a work-life balance. And I know I have gone through, my mother suffered from Parkinson and she was away in Pakistan, and last time I was not able to go when she passed away. It was in the middle of the campaign in 2015, how difficult it can be. So we are investing in home care also, so that seniors can live longer in their homes and they don't have to go into the retirement homes. So through National Housing Strategy, we are investing into mental health and home care, so that our seniors are looked after and we provide opportunities for them to retire with dignity.
Yeah, also to the same point of increasing at-home care for people who are aging and want to stay in their homes. Back to the guaranteed livable income, this would benefit all people, especially those who are trying to balance working and taking care of their children and their aging parents. And also looking at ideas around a shorter work week and having better mental health services for people who are dealing with stressful situations, having access to these resources, and thinking about, all of these multitudes that we're carrying with us when we're going into work makes us less productive, and we can't actually enjoy our time at work when we're stressed out about what's going on in our homes. So, raise the minimum wage, but also think about having a shorter work week so we have more time to spend in our homes doing what matters most to us.
I think, well, one of the things that we talked about today is increasing the inequities between the pay gaps, right? So with the wage gap, and I think that will be a start for sure, right? I also think that one of the things that we need to realize is that our system, and you see this, we have such a, and you know this, we have such a aging senior population, and the millennials, and we're all in the middle, and that's why our platform is to try to get you ahead, and we recognize this. We recognize that with the aging population and with expenses going up, that we're trying to provide incentives. And we're slowly, I don't have all my platform information yet because every day we're releasing something new. But one of the things I have spoken to them about is seniors and the issue of seniors, to be honest, which was one of the reasons why I ran, because I saw my parents and I've seen what they've given to this country, and I believe that seniors aren't well taken care of. And so that is something that I brought up. I'm waiting to hear. So unfortunately, I can't give you a...
Yeah, so in addition to our fighting and tackling for affordable housing, dental, vision, and mental health care services, pharmacare, and a minimum wage push to livable wage, we're also seeking to have and lead a national senior strategy, right? And what that would look like would be to also develop national care standards for both home care and long-term care. Also, we'll make the Canada Caregiver tax credit refundable. It also talks about strengthening pensions. So y'all ain't got CRCEO pensions, like them getting paid out before you yourself get pensions, right? So it's putting people first instead of corporations.
Thank you very much. This has been an amazing discussion. I think we'll do 2 minutes each. You can each have 2 minutes to sum up your positions and give your final pitches for the evening. We'll start with you.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks to WomenEd for organizing this and to have this important discussion why gender equality is important. I think it's a very pivotal time for our women, and I am proud that my party believes that the success of economy benefits greatly from the participation of women, and that's why in the last 4 years we have invested in our women, invested in programs, whether it was increasing the number of women in skilled trades or women in STEM, or equal pay for equal work legislation, or investing into domestic violence or into women entrepreneurship. We are at a very important point. I think we need to recognize that whether we have two clear choices as Canadians, whether we want to move forward after this election on October 21st or move backward to Harper era of cuts. So I think all of you will take important decision on October 21st and make sure that you move forward in order to develop a better Canada, a successful Canada for all our future generations.
I just want to say thank you guys for being here today. I'm so honored to be speaking about women's issues, and I just have to say that, you know, maybe a year or two ago, I could never even imagine myself getting into politics at all. And now, you know, being able to uplift myself and break down my own boundaries, the own boundaries that I set for myself because I was a young woman. And to your point of, you know, you expect a politician to look a certain way and have a certain socioeconomic background and a certain level of education. And I really had to break down all of these misconceptions in my own mind and think about who should represent us in our politics. It should be normal people that we can relate to and we can see ourselves in. And so I'm finally starting to see, you know, women out there that I can actually see myself in, women that I can relate to, you know, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you know, she's like a young person who's in hospitality, who was helping her family being raised in a small apartment. It's like, that's pretty much my same story right now. So it wasn't even possible for me until recently. And that's just a testament to how much strength just one female role model can be for every single woman coming up. And, you know, honestly, facing this climate crisis, which is the only thing that motivates me to get political at all, it requires everybody's participation, but especially the participation of strong, loud, bold, defiant women. So that's what I aim to do, and I'm not going to give up regardless of the outcome, because these issues have not been addressed. And we as women, we hold that responsibility. We are taking care of Mother Earth, okay? And we have to respect the feminine, the mother, and that's what I aim to do today. Thank you.
Like my colleague here, I'd like to say the same thing. I'm actually very honored to be able to speak here today on this topic. I've never spoken on this topic politically, so this has been new for me. I am passionate about women's issues, and I am passionate about equality for women, regardless what party I'm from. And it's an honor for me to be here today and talk to you about it. And I think no matter what, any one of these women here, I think are a great representative of women and women leadership. And I think, you know, it's always important to acknowledge that as women, we need to. And I'm so grateful that I can be here today and speak to you about this. And I will continue championing for these issues. It's something that's always been near and dear to my heart. I have like I said, I keep mentioning, I have a phenomenal 8-year-old. And one of the things for me I've realized is when I started running for politics, somebody asked her in my campaign, they said, you know, Soraya, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she turned to them, she said, well, I want to be a veterinarian and I want to be the prime minister. And I said, you know what, kiddo, you can do that. Why? Because, you know, this is the movement, right? Women, we are strong and we are bold and we are fierce. And it may seem odd from someone like me as a conservative to say that, but, you know, but that's something actually I wanted to talk about. That's something that I struggle with at the doors every day because people have a judgment, and we're talking about women and equality. People look at me and perceive me and they say, oh, you're a conservative woman, so then you must be X, Y, and Z. Well, when I go to the door and I say, listen, I consult on poverty alleviation, community development, you know, economic development. These are the things that I do all around the world. So, you know, I might look a certain way or you might have certain perceptions to who I am, but what I want everyone to realize, I think the future of politics is this next generation, and there's a bunch of us that are fierce, and it doesn't matter which party we're from. I think that we all can make a difference. So.
Yeah, I definitely want to you know, reiterate that choices, legislation, and policies that are pushed through have an impact on humans, have an impact on all of us. And you know, with the NDP, we're going to be making different choices. We're going to be raising revenue through new, fair, and progressive sources. I want everybody to keep one thing straight. We're only ever asked how we're going to pay for things when it's actually about bettering the conditions for everybody so we can live and thrive. Are we ever actually asked how we're going to pay these corporate giveaways? And just for some fact checks, liberals have continuously thrown money at corporations, right? $4.5 billion for a pipeline, worsening our climate. The 2018 Fall Economic Statement, $14 billion corporate giveaway, right? And there's multiple of these examples. We'll end fossil fuel subsidies immediately. We won't let big polluters off the hook, and we'll ensure that big corporations and the super wealthy pay their fair share. Because when the big corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share, we're able to reinvest that revenue into communities so none of us are left behind. The parliamentary budget officer had even mentioned through our super wealth tax that, and that's just one mechanism of our new just progressive taxation, that we could bring in upwards of $70 billion, right? So we really have to ensure that October 21st, we push for bold, transformative, courageous leadership that has the political will to ensure that our communities have conditions where we can all live and thrive. Not just 87, like fact check, just to end it off, 87 of the richest families in Canada have the same amount hoarded as the 12 million, not $1 million, million folks with the lowest income. That is not just, and that is not a way to get a fair, just, and sustainable Canada. And we can, and we deserve better. Woo!
What a great night, what a great conversation. Thank you all very much, each of you, for coming here, taking your time out of the very busy campaign. And I know you're rushing from door to door and working all so very hard. But it's been very informative. I wish you each all the very best, and again, I'm in awe of people who put themselves forward to try and build a better country. And one day I'd love to see a woman running for Prime Minister.
There is one.
Exactly.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Because Kim Campbell didn't win the election, that's what I was
Yeah,
saying.
you're
We
right,
haven't
you're right.
had a
Running,
first
true.
elected female
Yeah.
prime minister yet.
Yeah.
And it's time.
Yeah.
It's time.
Agreed.
So thank you all very much, and it's been such a pleasure for me to be here, so thank you.
On behalf of Women Act, thank you for coming out today. We are so happy that you are here. Thank you once again. And a big round of applause for a wonderful moderator, Cynthia. Gratitude. You always respond. We feel spoiled. I'm sorry I have to say it, so thank you so much for your help today. And
You know I believe so strongly in what you do, and it's so important. Thank you.
To United Way for the location. They have generously supported Women Act with providing the location. Now, one thing though, it's a beautiful building, but the lights goes off at 9 p.m. It's not personal, so if you see a bit of a blackout, just is part of the management. So thank you again. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you.